Okay, my name is Samuel Fontana. I'm a priest in the Diocese of Lafayette, and I'm presently the pastor of St. Thomas More Church in Eunice, Louisiana. I've been a priest for about 8 years, and for some of that time, I was doing typical priestly ministry in small towns outside Lafayette. For the last 5 years, I was teaching philosophy and doing formation at the college seminary in Louisiana, living with college students, studying to be priests, teaching and working with them. My kind of background growing up before I became a priest, my dad is a business owner. He's kind of a leader in the field of occupational therapy and industrial medicine. And we moved back home to Louisiana to start a business. And then I was born. And so I grew up, my dad working in his own occupational therapy practice, which actually we just sold the business after 38 years yesterday. So my dad can retire. And then growing up, I worked different jobs in restaurants and coffee shops and cutting grass and things like that. But then I went to seminary right out of high school. And so I spent essentially my whole formative years from 18 to 27 living in seminary, studying philosophy and then theology. And so not working and kind of engaged in pastoral work. And now that I'm a pastor and I'm not living in a seminary and not teaching philosophy, I'm living back with regular people who live regular lives. And so it's been a great joy to be a priest and to kind of share with people's lives in the ordinary day-to-day business of living.
So can you tell us why you were interested in this subject and ultimately the exhibit?
Well, I would say two things. First is that part of it is myself and just my own interest over the years in study. And that the bigger part is just responding to people's questions. So you, Jay, other people, in the parish, in Lafayette community, kind of coming to me with not looking for answers, but to kind of explore the question of work. So I would say it's really the coming together of those two things, my own interest in work and then responding to people's questions, often motivated by faith, like how do I discern my job, or like, how can I work as a Christian, but sometimes just like super practical stuff. So I'd say the coming together of those couple of things. So years ago, some friends and I had an idea of to try to kind of follow the Catholic worker movement, charism started by the servants of God, Dorothy Day and Peter Maurin. I read a lot of Dorothy Day's writings and a lot of the kind of the source work behind Peter Maurin's ideas in economics and in broadly what we call like social justice, but specifically this whole question of like, what is a philosophy of work and how do Christians think about work? How do they engage in work? I did a lot of that in college, and I was connecting it a lot with stuff that I grew up with, things that I was witnessing living in the city and witnessing kind of urban poverty, a lot of things I was seeing living in the country, witnessing kind of agrarian societies, post-agrarian societies and kind of rural poverty, and kind of putting all that together. So some friends and I, were just talking about this, and we wanted to put together some kind of a study to bring those ideas, to ordinary people. And so we put together this event that Jay, that you came to, and part of that presentation was really moving, I think, for all of us. I think for a lot of people, that was the first time that explicit like Christian faith and Christian teaching was put in conversation with like very ordinary economic, practical kind of realities. And that didn't really give us a lot of answers, but I think it kind of like it started generating some questions, which eventually led to having an extended conversation in Needville, like talking to people about how they can discern their work, their profession, their employment, their job, like all these things as a Christian. And so for me, I would say like this is like, none of this is my ideas and none of it is really my initiative. It's really like the church has a wisdom, and we have questions, and somehow those two are kind of coming together. And that's really been happening the last couple of years.
The exhibit title is Why We Work, which is both sort of a question, hey, why do we work? And a little bit of a statement, this is why we work. So I wonder if you could, drawing from either one of those, drawing from the title of the exhibit, speak to why we work.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. It's both a question that we ourselves were asking, like, why do we work? The situation of the pandemic, the situation of being a young person kind of coming out of college or changing careers or retiring. Like, that's a real question. Why work? Why do this work? Or why not, do something else? But you're right. It's also like a statement, because we all do work, and implicit in that is a rationale, a reason, a purpose. But very often, like, we don't know that. We don't know why we work, why we do the things that we do. And a lot of the kind of easy answers that come off the front of the mouth are not the deeper answers, right? I work to pay the bills. I work to provide for my family. Those are all true, but that's not really the heart of it. So for me, and also as a priest, I kind of struggle with this, because like traditionally, like, I belong to the one profession that does not work, right? Like the original leisured class that just lives off of the work of other people. And the work I do is like spiritual or whatnot. And that's always kind of bothered me, because I think a large part of that is misunderstood or untrue. And I've always felt in my life a need to work, not necessarily earning a paycheck, but the need to use my gifts and skills and talents beyond simply like ministerial pastoral work. In some sense, kind of like being a parent or being like like raising kids, like that is work, but that's not the only work of your life. So for me, it's always been a very personal question too. Like, why, like when I was in seminary, like, why am I on the one hand very convinced that God is asking me to receive holy orders and do pastoral ministry, but on the other hand, I have a great desire to work. So after kind of like talking to a lot of people, thinking about it, studying it, I would kind of break it down, the statement aspect, a couple different ways. Why do we work? There's the surface level of we work because we have to pay bills, because we have to live, day to day to day. But the deeper reality for a human being, so not even as a Christian, just as a human being, we work because we ourselves are incomplete. And I think people, and this came out through some of the witnesses that we gathered, young people and old people, we work ultimately, like the ultimate why is because it's good for us, because we are changed by the work that we do. And we're changed for the better, or we're changed for the worse. Like, to work well makes us, and to work poorly unmakes us, or it kind of breaks us. So like little kids, like when we come into the world, we have powers, we have abilities, we have interests, we have skills, but it's all very nascent. Like, it's all very inchoate, or like kind of, it's not formed at all. And it only becomes formed the more we participate. And I even saw this kind of in real life, like working with college kids, like college seminarians, and I still work with young people in college settings. And if they don't have a way to participate, and to like use their gifts, then their gifts don't really exist. There's like this weird thing where until you take whatever your interest or your talent and you put it at the service of other people, that gift doesn't really exist. So it's not like you have this whole storehouse of interests and abilities and you're just waiting to use them. They don't exist until you use them, which is kind of frustrating with young people. Like this idea that when you're 18 or 19, you have to like know your major, your career path. You got to have it all figured out. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So even as a teacher, like inviting young people, like, hey, we're going to go cut grass and we're going to garden, or we're going to try to build something, and they look at you like you're stupid because they don't know what that is. And then kind of watching them as they engage in it, they realize that they have a facility, or they have an interest, or they have a gift to give. I would say even kind of part of this too is like watching my dad's work. So my dad's an occupational therapist, and his life's work has been, to kind of summarize it, what we call in industrial medicine, basically taking people who work industrial jobs, offshore oil rigs, or in salt mines or paper mills, which are often very physically demanding jobs, and teaching them how to work in that job so they don't get injured, or if they do get injured for some reason, rehabbing them so that they can go back to work. So from a purely economic standpoint, financial standpoint, you say, okay, well, we're saving companies money by not having to pay workers' comp, by putting people back to work. But the real reality, and I think what sustained my dad for 38 years in what's essentially like, a market, a business that doesn't make any financial sense, is it's not just financially good for a company to not pay workers' comp, but fundamentally it's good for a man to do work and not simply to receive a check. And and my dad has kind of witnessed that when people suffer, injuries, they become disabled. There's a debilitation that happens in their life where they're no longer able to participate and engage, and that flows over beyond just the 9 to 5 into their ability to care for their family or to do the things that they love. And interestingly enough, in the last 20 years of my dad's business, he kind of broke into the fitness industry as well. He has a gym and an Olympic pool. And, you drive around small towns and there's a gym on every corner. People work out, people get fit. But what we found is that it wasn't necessarily young people wanting to get fit. It was older people who might have had an injury or a stroke. They were on pain medication. That exercise was a way of restoring them to full participation in their own lives and in their community. So we have so many stories of, an 80-year-old woman, for instance, who has an injury, is on pain medication, and essentially is being told in a very polite way just to go home and take pills and watch TV and die, but once they start coming to the gym, they start swimming, they start exercising, they see people, they visit with people, physically they're able to stay in the real world. Socially, they're invited into the world. And so it's not just losing weight or being fit, but we're rehabbing people to participate in the real world. And that's what work is, right? Work is not just me satisfying a private need, but me going out into the world, making a gift of myself, using whatever gifts or talents that I've received. And I'm changed by that. So I would say ultimately on a human level, we work not merely to eat or not merely to pay for our bills. We work because we are works in progress, right? And St. John Paul II, in his encyclical on work, which I read in college and I loved, but didn't really understand, he makes that case very strongly that man is the product of his own work. That's a biblical idea. And I've seen that in older people who have had long years of marriage and childbearing and work in the community, professional work, a diversification of skills. You become a more complete person. And even in retirement, there comes an enjoying of the fruits of your labor, not just your bank account, the financial side of retirement, but enjoying the friendships, the skills, the experiences, the whole life that you've built through your work. And then as a Christian, taking up that same theme, we are works in progress, and the world is kind of built through our work. But as a Christian, I'm always been brought back to this idea. For instance, as a priest, my main work is the liturgy. It's the offering of the Eucharist. That's what I have to do every day. So that whole idea of offering, I think is not just important for priests. It's fundamental to being a Christian, that work doesn't become complete until it becomes a gift, until it becomes an offering. People live that at home, by offering their labor to their kids, to their spouse, by offering that to society. And sometimes that offering comes at a great price, through sacrifice, through suffering, through pain, very boring work, So lately, as a Christian, I've been very interested in that, the way that the work that we do very often isn't satisfying, or it's not meaningful, in part because we don't know that our work is supposed to be a gift, an offering that's made. And having the reminder of offering Mass every day is, to me, is so helpful as a Christian, that everything that I'm doing, all the things of the world that are passing through my hands, through my work, are ultimately being given over to God.
Things. I mean, even as I pray the rosary, I pray the the joyful mysteries and the sorrowful mysteries, I'm struck by the incarnation, the Paschal mystery, and how that directly relates to me as a human in how I offer my life, and even how my sorrows are both united to the sorrows of the cross, but ultimately redeemed and and glorified. So can you just talk about
Yeah.
what in the liturgy?
So I'll say, yeah, the part that struck you and struck a lot of us is something that is so simple and we hear all the time. So I'll say that and then kind of back up a little bit, like what that means. So every Mass, when we bring bread and wine to be offered, ultimately to become the body of the Lord, to be offered back to us as food, we say a prayer that's based on kind of an ancient Hebrew prayer, just a prayer of thanksgiving and blessing. We say, "Blessed are you, Lord God of all creation, for through your goodness we have received the bread we offer, fruit of the earth and work of human hands. He'll become for us the bread of life." And actually, the Latin, the original Latin is a little more explicit, that this bread is fruit of the earth and fruit of the work of our hands. So it uses the word fruit twice. So in other words, like what we offer at Mass is not wheat, or it's not, like raw elements, like the earth and the sky and the wind and the water. Like creation belongs to God already, like it's already his and it already serves his purposes. And creation is so fruitful, especially living out here in Southwest Louisiana, like just to see the prairies in bloom, you realize like the great abundance that just happens, not because we plow or because we fertilize, like it just happens. So creation is fruitful, but that's not enough, that we have to mix our work into creation, into the mix. And then there's a greater fruitfulness that happens, right? So human art brings about a greater fruitfulness than merely nature is able to provide. And so when you go to Mass, like that's what the priest is saying, that this bread is the fruit of the earth, but it's also the fruit of the work of our hands. And so symbolically, that bread, it is bread, but it's symbolic of all of human labor. And I try to teach my people this in the parish, that symbol is not just beautiful, that's meant to educate us, and it's meant to actually speak to our reality. So like I tell my people, like when you go to Mass, you have to be aware that what you're laying on the altar is everything that you've been thinking about or giving your attention to or worrying about or investing in over the last 6 or 7 days, right? Because whatever, this is an idea of the fathers of the church, ancient fathers, whatever is not offered to God can't be transformed and received back. So there's an idea that people have that you need to take, the sacrifice of the Mass, take that grace and bring it out into the world. And that's a beautiful idea. Like we leave Mass with that idea. But I would say what a lot of Christians don't understand is that it's not that the grace of the Mass has to go out into the world. It's that the world has to come into the Mass to be offered. And where does that happen? Like that can only happen through the hearts and minds of the people who offer the Mass, right? So we're not literally going to take the NASDAQ, or take, Amazon, or take, the oil industry or whatever, big economics, and like put them on the altar. But as priests, as baptized priests, our work that we do has to be offered so that it can be, kind of transformed. So just to go back, just like philosophically, like you think like John Locke, his idea of property, he said that whatever man mixes his own personal labor into, he owns, it becomes his property, right? So I appropriate water and land and animals and things. I appropriate the goods of the earth to myself by investing my time, my attention, my work into it. Now there's some problems with that when you kind of run that, to its completion, but he's also very right about that like we do appropriate the world. We do make it our own. St. John Paul II, who wrote this encyclical that we have that speaks about the philosophy of work, he says elsewhere in one of his reflections about the priesthood itself, that the priest, as one who stands between God and the world, like the priest ultimately doesn't offer the world, the priest ultimately offers himself. Like Jesus offers himself to God the Father. And if we are offered, it's only because we are in Jesus's heart, right? Like all of creation gets offered back to God because all of creation passes in some sense through Jesus. And this is profound because this is what it means to be a human being, right? We're the ones who know. We look up in the stars and we see them, we see the animals, we drink the water, we grow the crops. Like, we're the ones who are in some sense over creation, knowing it, loving it, being frustrated with it, fighting with it. And all of that concern, that attention that we have for things, that all passes through us on its way back to God. So I would say, to kind of take John Locke in a Christian sense, like, we do appropriate the world, but only by participating in it. And so there's like really two movements. Like, I have to participate in the world. I can't be a passive like consumer of things, or I can't just participate until I can get enough stuff. And then I go back to my house and watch TV and eat potato chips or something, right? Like, I participate in the world, and in doing so, like, I'm changed, right? People are changed by the work that they do. And then I can offer myself, and with myself, I offer all those things that have been appropriated to me, the things I love, the things I'm frustrated with, the things I worry about. So ultimately, the Eucharist, it is an offering of gifts, but it's an economic reality, right? In other words, it has to do with the taking up of goods, the transforming of those goods, giving them added value, right? And giving them and receiving them as a gift. Yeah, sure. I think just to kind of go through it, like, I've been very edified just listening to people tell their stories about their relationship with work, in part because I think they're answering questions that everybody has, but maybe not everyone knows is a relevant question. So for instance, like Grace's witness about engaging in work that she doesn't find particularly interesting or particularly skilled at, and not just suffering through that kind of with clenched teeth, or not just justifying that because of some financial reward in the future, or some kind of, job ambition that's going to come in the future, but like sitting in that tension and noticing herself being changed by it. I thought that was a big deal, right? I mean, we were taught this when we were little kids, like 10 years old, cutting our neighbor's grass. But I think my parents, they made us go through the right exercise, but maybe told us the wrong lesson, right? The lesson was, you need to go cut your neighbor's grass because you got to make money, because you got to buy your own baseball mitt or something like that, whatever. But the real lesson was, you need to go cut your neighbor's grass when it's 98 degrees outside, because you need to learn to do hard things, because you need to be able to see yourself being changed by doing hard things, right? And seeing yourself expand. Like, that's something that we should have learned very early on, but all of us are still learning. So to hear Grace kind of say that, like, I welcome the givenness and the gift of work that might not be my, my end all career, my vocation, my dream job, but I welcome it because it's reality, and reality ultimately is pulling me beyond myself. In fact, I was listening to her talk this morning. I was thinking about, remember the English author Iris Murdoch? She's got that great line where she says, love is the painful realization that something other than myself is real. Like, love only comes when I come up against reality and realize that reality is way more than me, and I choose to come out of myself and embrace it. So I thought that was something that should speak to, to people at any point in their career, or in any kind of, any kind of job, any kind of work that people do. I thought specifically also Sean's witness about working post prison, and kind of like helping educate some of these young men into a better, more healthy idea about success, about, how you measure your success and how you work towards that, and contrasting that with his earlier experience. I mean, listening to his witness, I was really struck with the fact that, his essential attitude, which led him ultimately to crime and to imprisonment, his attitude is really not any different than I think most people's. In other words, this idea that I want to have a certain kind of life, a certain kind of success, and I judge that based on my ability to buy things, to have a certain material, well-being, and I'll do whatever it takes to get that. And I remember hearing that and said that, like what leads a young man from an impoverished background to sell drugs rather than to complete his law degree, that attitude is really no different than the college students that I work with who are just kind of going through like the catalog of degree and career options saying, I want to have a certain level of income, a certain kind of lifestyle. What do I have to do to make that happen? Which is just bypassing the whole lesson, which he's trying to kind of communicate from his own experience, that like your work is worth something, right? And the value of that unified life where it's not, I go make money and then I live my life. I go sell drugs and make money, or I go to an office and, do a desk job, whatever it is, that bifurcation of life that ultimately does damage like to a person. So I was very struck by that because I thought, it's easy to kind of split the world into the haves and the have-nots, on just a purely economic basis, poor people, rich people. But I think the reality is that most everybody we meet is very impoverished in their understanding of, in their formation for work, and I'd say last of all, maybe just like listening to Lisi's testimony. And it's partly because like I didn't know the full part of her story, but also because I think it's something that I've seen in some of my family members, I've seen in some of my friends, which is essentially like, Lisi doing translating work, which is not, hugely financially lucrative. She couldn't sustain herself with that. Is also very kind of hidden. People don't even know that that's what she does. But why does she do it? She does it for the love of the work, and the joy of kind of like seeing that work unfold. I've talked to young friends, I've talked to my own family about the whole question of, should I get a job outside the house or should I stay home with the kids and so on and so forth. And it always struck me that very often that's a purely economic discussion, like can we afford to go on one income, or does it make better sense to not pay childcare and I'll stay home with the kids, whatnot. And that's super important. But there's also that idea, the flip side of, I want to work outside the home because I find meaning in that, I find purpose of that. And so you're trying to balance the finances, the purpose, and then the reality of children and all this kind of stuff. But I think her witness really shows that like, yes, like to take care of your kids and to do work in the home is meaningful and is valuable. And hopefully as Christians, like that's not a shock to us, so like my mom didn't work outside the home until we were a lot older. And I know a lot of moms, and I maybe know at least two dads, that their primary work is in the home. But even that, there could be a certain romance about that, or a certain kind of naivete to say that it is meaningful and we should be satisfied with that. Like I remember talking to young people and they said, wow, if my husband could pay all of our bills, right, then of course we would just stay home and take care of the kids, because what else would we want to do? And I think Lisi like shows that like we were not made just for, for the home, we were made for the world, and there is something about work that brings us beyond just satisfying the needs of home, and using our gifts to do something useful, to do something beautiful, to make a gift to others. So when Lisi's talking about, doing this translating work, which has a very practical impact in people's lives, immigrants, but also translating novels that someone in Italy is going to read and will enjoy something that she enjoys. I say, okay, here's a woman who is not doing this just to pay her bills. She's not doing it because she's bored. She's not doing it because she doesn't love her kids and she's, she wants to get out of the house and do something else. She's doing this because she loves this work, right? And she needs to make a gift of herself in this way. So all those themes kind of came out, that to come together, like it is true. Why do we work? Ultimately, we work because we work well, because we recognize that we are changing ourselves. We are changed by work. We become givers of gifts, and not just passive, participants, passive observers of reality.
Thank you so much, Father, for your work on this exhibit of work. Look forward to seeing you in Houston tomorrow, in New York in February for the encounter. And then hopefully after Easter, we can do the presentation of the exhibit in Needville.
That would be wonderful.